This pattern right here is called helicopters, and it's one of the patterns I taught in Advent of Test 2025, so you can go find a tutorial for this much. Today, we're going to be folding beyond this amount. So we're going to be folding actually a variant on this pattern that we designed together in a previous live stream, the one on the Advent of Test 2025 ebook and alternate endings to patterns. And we are going to be folding specifically that variant that we designed together in the stream on a 48 division grid. So I've already got my grid folded, and I want to go through more of the theory side for this tutorial. So this will be more like one of my Tessellation Academy tutorials, where we'll look at the crease pattern, we'll look at the tiling, and we'll see, okay, what can the tiling tell us about what we're doing in this pattern? So first up, here's what the crease pattern looks like. We did design this together, so you can see the whole thought process of what goes where and how we made those choices in that other video that I'll make sure to link in the description as well. And basically with this pattern, the difference between helicopters and helicopter hangar hinges on these triangle twists. So in helicopters, the pattern I taught in the Advent of Test tutorials, we had this mixed depth hexagon, the two-fold mixed depth hexagon, as a position of rotational symmetry in the broader pattern, and therefore this closed triangle that you see here is an open triangle. So you can see I've got an open triangle twist in that position in the Advent of Test tutorial. But we have another triangle twist here that is taking on the position of symmetry, and we see three of these mixed depth hexagons around it. That's because this triangle is now a position of symmetry instead of that triangle, and the symmetry position that would have been in the mixed depth hexagon gets pushed out to in between two of these triangles, in between two of these mixed depth hexagons. So this space in between. And just looking at the crease pattern, you can't really tell if there's going to be any good stopping points along the way. That's why we use the tiling diagram instead. So the tiling diagram shows what shapes are present. There's a hexagon, and then triangles around it, trapezoids around that. These two-fold mixed depth hexagons. Around those, there's these triangles and these double depth triangles. So those are the components of our pattern. And we can see, okay, where are all the symmetry points? Like I mentioned, there's threefold symmetry in the double depth triangle. And let me zoom in on that real quick. Threefold symmetry in those triangles, twofold symmetry in these spaces between the loop with two of the smaller triangles and two of the mixed depth hexagons, and then sixfold symmetry in the center, like we would expect. And then what can we say as far as boundaries? What are our stopping points? Because when we can draw a smooth boundary in the tiling that doesn't have like any dips, basically in math speak, we're looking for a convex shape. And that means that all of the pleats that cross this line, so any straight line in a tiling, all the pleats that cross that line are parallel. That's just kind of the construction of how the tiling works in my methodology, where I'm not saying the tiling has to overlay directly on the crease pattern, but the tiling is kind of a guarantee that the contractions in the paper due to the pleats will be balanced. And so all pleats cross tile boundaries perpendicularly, kind of by definition. And so all of these pleats crossing this boundary are parallel to each other. You can see there's another boundary further out, and that's how far we're going to get today. You can even fit the next closed hexagon, so the repeat of the center, onto a 48 division grid, but I'm going to leave it at this boundary more to show where the boundary is. So we're going to be folding, and the amount that we got to in the Advent of Test tutorial is this inner boundary where we have the mixed depth hexagon and those triangle twists, the smaller triangle twists. And then we're going to additionally go through the next layer of twists around the center in today's tutorial. So I'm going to bring up the crease pattern, and we're going to see that while we're folding. And I'm just going to zoom in on the part that we're starting with, and we can go ahead and get rolling. I am also going to make sure that I can see the chat. So there we go. Good morning, Nancy. Glad you're here. So we're going to start out with a closed hexagon twist in the center. We've got that closed hexagon in the crease pattern. We're going to go ahead, and since my grid lines are parallel to the edges of the paper, my grid line through the center goes to the corner of the page, or the sheet. And so I'm going to have my mountain fold go out to the corner of the paper, and my valley fold one space above, because I'm doing this as a right-handed twist, which is what is in the crease pattern. Hi, Early. Glad you could join us. Actually, let me see what I can do to be able to see both what I'm doing and what y'all are saying. Okay, there we go. Yeah, usually my tutorials are pre-recorded for Tessellation Academy and other courses, so I don't have the additional screen needs of keeping track of a third thing at the same time. Oh, and a little note about the difficulty level of this piece. I would say this is a 4-star difficulty level, which means that it is fairly complicated. We do use mixed depth twists. We are using really dense spacing. And there's some really challenging parts here. So if you're brand new to folding origami tessellations, this is not one that I would recommend. So starting off with our closed hexagon twist, I'm going to bop it, grab it, give it a sharp twist around, and get that twist in place. And then we are going to flip over to the opposite side to fold the next triangle twists. So these triangle twists are spaced really closely relative to the hexagon. You can see there is a single grid spacing between these parallel mountain folds. So then on the paper, what that means is since we've flipped over, the mountain folds in the crease pattern show up as valleys. One of those valleys is under the existing pleat. The next valley that's one space away will run right along the folded mountain. And I'm going to add in my mountain fold one space outside of the valley, and pick up that third pleat direction, making a single point, the intersection between all three of these mountain folds. This will make a tube going out to the right, and press to squash. Now, this is something that the tiling doesn't tell you, but I know from previous experience that if I go around clockwise, I'm going to have an easier time with my pleat overlaps when I flip over and fold the trapezoid twists. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. Right now, this triangle is obscuring the next pleat that I want to use, so I'm going to lift that pleat out from under and have my new valley fold with the same spacing as the previous triangle. Valley, mountain, we're folding on top of this existing pleat. And my new mountain fold will go right under the corner of the previous triangle twist. So you'll notice when I put in that mountain fold, I was letting the triangle fold over a bit to ease the tension, and then when the valley is fully put in place, then both triangles can be flat again. And from there, I will repeat those steps exactly several times. So lifting up the hidden pleat, putting in a new pleat at that single space between the valley folds, finding my third pleat of this triangle where the mountain goes right under the corner of the existing triangle. There, that's as far as I can zoom in. And squash and repeat, lift the hidden pleat. And I am intentionally moving rather quickly through this part of the tutorial so we can get into the harder part around, like, outside of the Advent of Tess level tutorial. And again, lift the hidden pleat. Add the new pleat on top. Find the third pleat of the triangle and squash. And then for my sixth triangle twist, I'm going to do a compound wrap over this bottom pleat. I have 3 pleats going out this way. One of them is hidden underneath, which I can go ahead and lift out. And so I'm going to be opening the bottom pleat, letting this valley that I drew in that hits 1 space out from the corner pop down. The valley is going to bounce. It's going to go 1 space this way. It's going to hit the valley underneath our first triangle, and it's going to bounce again and go in the same direction it was going originally. And then we need to finish setting up our triangle with the pleat overlap that we've been having the previous several before we can let the mountain bouncing around lay down flat. This is a compound wrap. I do have a video that explores these wraps in more depth, but like I said earlier, this is an advanced pattern, and I do expect that you'll already be familiar with compound wraps. So now we have pleat overlaps on 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of our intersections of pleats, and a compound wrap on the 6th. And I'm going to flip over And actually, if we return to the tiling, then we can see that we are not at a stopping point. What we've folded so far is a hexagon and 6 triangles, and that makes a very jagged zigzag shape. So we expect a lot of pleat overlaps. And then we're going to add our 6 trapezoids, and that is still going to have a very jagged shape. We're going to have pleat overlaps where double depth pleats are overlapping with single depth pleats. So that much we can read from the tiling. And back to folding, I'm going to identify that this is my interaction of pleats. That's the compound wrap. And I'm going to go to the next overlap clockwise from there to start folding my trapezoids. Now, with this particular pattern, there is actually, so in order to fold this particular pattern, we have to pay attention to how the trapezoids are connected to the triangles, because the tiling is chiral. And what I mean by that, so if we go back to the tiling for a moment, is that you could take the mirror image of this tiling and it would look different. It would look like you took all these trapezoids and instead of connecting them this way, they were connected that way. So it's a shift in how the trapezoid is connected. So we have to pay extra attention as we're folding to how the pleats of the trapezoid are coming in. In this case, I have one single depth pleat connecting to the upper triangle, the middle single depth pleat connecting to the lower triangle, and the third single depth pleat 2 spaces away from the existing mountain. So that means on this overlap, I have one mountain coming from the upper triangle, one coming from the lower triangle, and the third mountain of a single depth pleat is 2 spaces away. And I can go ahead and put in the valley as well. So that's making a tube going around the hexagon. And then with our trapezoid twist, we're letting the middle single depth pleat, the middle mountain, become the mountain of the double depth pleat. And we can even see this on the crease pattern. This is the mountain of the single depth pleat, and it's on the same grid line as the mountain of the double depth pleat. And for our first trapezoid, like our first triangle, we're not going to have any extra overlaps. We can set that up and squash. Now I'm going to continue around clockwise, just because it's, so this is also a choice, and you get to figure out, just like with the triangles around the hexagon, which way for the trapezoids around the triangles and hexagon is going to be the easiest for you to fold. I'm going to go clockwise, and I'm going to use my previous information from up here and say, hey, I'm going to have a valley fold of the double depth pleat coming straight from that closed triangle hole. And I can use the 6-fold symmetry around the hexagon to say whatever happened here has to happen the same way here. And so I'm going to take that valley and I'm going to let it bounce over the existing pleat. And what's going to be different about this compound wrap is that there's going to be 2 spaces between the parallel zigzags because this is a double depth pleat that's coming through here. And if you're familiar with the Muraori corrugation, this arrangement of folds is extremely familiar. And if you don't know the Muraori corrugation, definitely look that up. It's very helpful in understanding how to get patterns to lay flat on a triangle grid. So I can use that setup and also use the cues from earlier where I have 1, 2, and then a tube for my single depth pleats. And I'm going to need those single depth pleats to already be in place before I can get this compound wrap to lay down flat. One other thing that I didn't draw on yet is that I will also need a mountain out here. So I end up with a three-way intersection of mountains at the corner of the trapezoid twist. And we're able to do this advanced form of the compound wrap to get the trapezoid twist in place, even though this pleat has its mountain heading straight through the middle of the twist if we weren't otherwise doing something to allow it to be in place. So I'm going to repeat that step 4 more times. And yes, I said 4. Well, I'm going to repeat it 3 more times exactly, and then the last one will be, we'll have the wrap on both sides. So I'm starting by identifying the valley of the double depth pleat. And then if I want to do this without drawing on the paper, I'm going to find my third single depth pleat that makes the tube. And then I can identify the point, the grid intersection that is at the corner of my trapezoid twist and make a 3-way intersection of mountains at that point and a second 3-way intersection of mountains, 1 grid spacing up into the wrap. And then the important thing here is that there are 2 spaces between this mountain heading out to the edge and the valley parallel to it. And there's just 1 space for this pleat going to the edge. Good morning, Zach. Glad you could join us. And so, like I said when we were looking at the tiling, each of these interactions of pleats is a double depth pleat and a single depth pleat. And I can continue adding in these trapezoids and the compound wraps. So basically what the compound wrap is doing is it's taking this contraction in the paper from the single depth pleat here and moving it over so it passes through over here. And to make that happen, the double depth pleat has to shift over 1 space as well. So we can get all of our twists in place and keep the pleats basically out of the way until we need them for the next twist. And for this one, it's going to look a little different because I'm passing over the compound wrap instead of the regular pleat overlap. So I'm going to have the two spaces right at the beginning, and then it's going to look different further down. We're going to have that one space between pleats under the double depth pleat, but that is normal and expected because we're getting back to the beginning. And what that means is we already have some stuff there. So we're going to see more stuff when we put our regular pleat through the area. So now for our 6th trapezoid, we are going to have the wrap on both sides. So I can identify, okay, here's my valley, and that's how it's going to bounce. That's the 3-way intersections that it's going to make. And I need to open the compound wrap. And now when I go to send my mountain fold down through, you can see that this mountain would be passing exactly through the middle of the first trapezoid, but we can use our trick with the mixed depth compound wrap to get that to shift over and lay down flat. Oh, that's interesting, Zach, that you can't see the messages. Mostly people have just been saying good morning. So we can have that same compound wrap on all of our trapezoid twists, or under all of our trapezoid twists, to get all of them into place. So from here, we are going to actually step into a full tiling break. So in the tiling, you can see we've gotten through these green trapezoids. And now when we fold the mixed depth twists, we just need these triangles in addition to these light blue stretched out hexagons to get to that nice next boundary. So that's exactly what we're going to do. We're going to do the mixed depth hexagons and the triangles between them. So returning to our crease pattern, we see that the mixed depth hexagons are on the back, and then we're going to have closed triangles on the front. So I'm going to flip over to the back side and start finding my mixed depth hexagon twist. So I'm going to start by opening up one of these compound wraps, basically restoring it to its 3D state. And I'm going to take special note of where the mountain folds are going. So we've got these mountain folds coming in from the trapezoid twists on the back. This is my single depth pleat, that's my double depth pleat. For my single depth pleat, the structure that I want to see is one space in, one space out. So that's looking at these grid lines, 1 in, 1 out. Then the double depth plate goes 2 in, and we can set up 2 out, and that is where the next mountain fold connects. So 2 in, 2 out, next mountain fold takes over. This mountain is at tube pleat spacing relative to the next twist, and when we fold this mountain fold, we will be folding through the corner of a trapezoid on the other side. But it's okay because the grid lines inside of the trapezoid line up with the grid lines outside, and so we don't have to care that much. So 2 in, 2 out, single depth pleat, 1 in, 1 out, another single depth plate, 1 in, 1 out, and then the next double depth plate, 2 in, 2 out, and another single depth plate, 1 in, 1 out, should bring us right back to our initial 1 in, 1 out. So earlier saying that when they layer several sheets of paper, misalignments appear in the grid. And yeah, some of that is going to be due to the thickness of the paper. But some of it might also be inaccuracies in the grid. I find that I have a much bigger problem with my grid lines not lining up when I've done something like a division of 5 on a rotated grid, which is often not as accurate, or not as accurate as like doing just divisions of 2 with an aligned grid, or in this case, a division of 3 with an aligned grid. You can often run into issues with your grid itself, but also when you do have really tight spacing and several layers, like 5, 7 layers, then often the thickness of the paper will cause misalignment. And that's part of what the wraps help with too. So next up, I'm going to do another of these mixed up hexagons. This one I saw sent a pleat through an existing trapezoid. Not my favorite thing. So I'm going to go clockwise. And the reason why I know that this pleat won't be a problem when it's going in this direction is because I saw in the tiling that a triangle fits there. So I will be able to do a triangle wrap, and that will resolve the tension in the pleats. So I'm going to open up this wrap, and I'm being very particular about opening up the wrap first before I do anything else, so I can correctly identify where my mountain folds are coming from. So this is the mountain of the double depth pleat. I see my 1 in, 1 out from the single depth pleat. So from that point, I'm going 2 in, 2 out, and then shooting a mountain back towards the existing mixed depth hexagon. And that mountain is shooting back. It's hitting this pleat, which I can wrap. And this is making a triangle wrap that is then passing under a double depth pleat. So I've got that triangle wrap and pleat, and then one space away I've got the valley for my double depth pleat. So that single depth pleat is going one in, one out. Then I hit my next direction of mountain fold, one in, one out. Next direction of mountain, which is a double depth pleat, and my fingers kind of automatically went ahead and put in the single depth pleat over here. And if you would like an additional reference, these two mountain folds are folding right next to each other. This is the compound wrap and the single depth pleat with a pleat overlap. And we can get that twist in place. Now we'll see in the next ring around the center that I'm often going to, at this point, go ahead and flip over and squash the triangle. But for this particular ring around the center, that's going to be a lot of flipping the paper back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And I can just go ahead and do all 6 of these mixed depth hexagons before doing the triangles. So rotating around, I'll open up all of these pleats, making sure I can see exactly where my mountain folds are coming from. This is my double depth, so 2 in, 2 out, and I can also use the fact that this mountain is 2 spaces away from the mountain closer in to reference that next single depth pleat, and that will cause a triangle wrap. Again, under the double depth pleat, but not combining with it. And I can get the rest of my pleats in place for this mixed depth hexagon. And squash. And earlier, back to your comment about the grid becoming difficult to have the folds, or let me rephrase, about having it be difficult to run a pleat through a bunch of layers and keep it on grid lines. That is a particularly large problem for flagstone patterns because all of the layers tend to bunch up in the same place, which is somewhat annoying. And we are working very close to flagstone spacing. In fact, this central spacing, I would say, is flagstone spacing. We have a little more space around these mixed depth hexagons, but you'll see in the next ring around the center, those are going to be at flagstone spacing with each other in the end. Although it'll be more space because it's flagstone on the double depth pleat. So it's 2 spaces to the twist on the other side instead of 1. But yeah. So next up, we've got, and actually we're really not using the crease pattern at this point in time, so I'm going to switch us fully to looking at the paper. And I am going to open up for the next hexagon with the awareness that I might need to do things in a slightly different order because we're getting around to the end of this ring around the center. And this could cause issues. for right now, what I did is I opened this pleat from the first hexagon to set up all the pleats for my new hexagon. And then I can close that pleat again. This mountain is going to add with the valley underneath, add destructively, like interference, so that that grid line after this point, when the valley is added, it is no longer folded. And I just have the valley down below and 3 spaces between the mountain up here and the parallel valley down under. So that is one solution. But then there's, oh, there's extra paper trapped inside there. I don't like squashing on that. So I'm going to go ahead and set up the next hexagon too. And for this one, I can go ahead and look at my other hexagons and say, how many spaces from this corner do I go until I hit that valley fold? And it's 1, 2, 3 spaces. So this is then counting backwards from under here, 1, 2, 3 spaces. I'm going to have the valley that leads to the triangle wrap right there. That takes that pleat out of the picture. And then I'm opening up the compound wrap. And I can find my tube pleat spacing and triangle wrap for my previous, or that's going under my previous hexagon. And now things are pretty chaotic in here, pretty 3D, but I have a flat enough area that I can firmly squash that 5th mixed depth hexagon. And then I can continue finding the pleats of my 6th mixed depth hexagon as needed, making sure to keep that triangle wrap in place. And once everything is firmly in place, then I can squash that mixed depth hexagon as well. So yeah. And I see the chat has continued. Yeah, there's a lot of nuance when it comes to the grid and getting into these more complicated patterns where the perfection of the grid, the precision of the grid matters more and more. Okay. So with those mixed depth hexagons in place, we can now flip over, and what we had seen earlier in the crease pattern is that these are all going to be closed triangle twists. And remember, if we were folding the version that I taught in Advent of Tess, those would be open triangles, but we're going for closed triangles. And by the way, it's entirely possible that I just ran into more difficulties with the pleats this time around with 48 divisions that I did not run into with 24. because of having more grid to work with. So sometimes more grid, more problems. So if you've tried folding helicopters on an extended grid and noticed that the tutorial didn't necessarily match up, that's probably why. Okay, so we've got our first stopping point outside of the central hexagon with no pleat overlaps. Awesome. How far do we need to go to get to the next one? So if you look at the crease pattern, that is really unclear. It's like, how far do I need to go? Well, how much grid do I have? But if you look at the tiling, you can see there is actually another stopping point before we hit the next repeat of the center. It is one mixed depth hexagon wide. So we are going to get these groups of 3 mixed depth hexagons. And specifically to start this layer around the center, I want to start with the double depth triangle and add on 1 mixed depth hexagon and 1 smaller triangle. This will basically take this inner boundary and extend it out to here. So that's still smooth. That'll still be a good stopping point. And then once I have that, I will add on until I have this much. And then I'll add on another layer, and then another layer, and another layer, and then for the final layer, I have to go all the way through this whole side. So that's the plan. And there's maybe a bit of nuance in the middle. But I'm going to start with this double depth triangle, which is something I do need the crease pattern to see the spacing for. So I'm going to go back to the crease pattern and see, hey, where is this double depth triangle? So it's going to be on the double depth plate. And I see the corner is 2 spaces from this point underneath. So that's my point underneath. 2 spaces out is the corner, which is where the valley fold goes off. So if I'm in the same orientation as the crease pattern, there's my valley fold coming off of there. And then 2 more spaces, I hit the mountain and the mountain fold goes. Conveniently, this is following a structure that I recognize in my crease pattern because, or sorry, not the crease pattern, in the folded form for the sequence of how I want to fold things. In general, you want to work from the pleat with the twists on it closest to the edge, and then work back and back and back, so that, say, if I started here, I would be sending a pleat straight into the existing area, because I would be putting a triangle at tube pleat spacing, sending a mountain straight through here. With this, any pleats that I send out are going off to the edge or out on this side, not through existing twists. So that is where I'm going to start for my next twist. And I'm going to need a compound wrap. So I have this valley coming through. I'm going to bounce 1 space because I'm crossing a single depth pleat, and then it's going to continue out in the same direction. Likewise for this mountain fold. And we're going to have mountains out that way. We have this existing valley. We're going to have another valley up through there and out through here as well. And again, this is very explicitly the Mura-Ori corrugation, which I usually have in arm's reach, but I can't seem to find right now. And we are going to both set up this compound wrap and find the third double depth pleat of our triangle twist. Notice that this valley is going to pair up with this already existing mountain. So you can really put the valley, and this is something you can see better on the other side. So the layering of this, you can either pull it over the top, which is better for reducing stress on the paper, or you can tuck it underneath, which is going to be better for the order that we're folding the pleats. So it really depends on how stressed your paper is with this. You can always move it back later. Excuse me. And then we can squash our double depth triangle twist. So it's very convenient that at this spacing we can have our whole twist in place and wrap to get around this single depth pleat. Extremely convenient. Then I'm going to flip over and fold another of my mixed depth hexagon twists, because I'd seen that that's what comes after the double depth triangle. So I'm opening my compound wrap. I'm noticing this is my double depth direction. So this is my single depth direction, 1 in, 1 out, 2 in, 2 out. I do have this existing pleat, so I'm actually going to prioritize finding the other pleat that goes this way. So finding that 1 in, 1 out, the start of that is where the valley or the next direction hits. I'm going to use that valley to make a triangle wrap. So this is a single depth triangle wrap. And I will have a new single depth pleat head out this way. And just like we saw with the double depth pleat earlier, the single depth pleat can either wrap around the double depth pleat or sit inside the double depth pleat. And for this one, I'm going to recommend having it sit inside. So you could have all of these pleats with the single depth sitting inside the double depth instead of being forced to be precisely in a certain location, adding stress to the paper. And yeah, we'll get back to what layering we want when we get all the way around to that point. And we can see when we squash this mixed depth hexagon that these two mixed depth hexagons are touching side to side. So that is actually flagstone spacing, but because it's on the double depth plate, it's not as difficult to work with. Excuse me. Oh yeah. So I'm seeing a comment in the chat. Wow, I just discovered all of this. Yeah, it really does look like magic the first time through, but there is theory behind it. So flipping over, I'm gonna take that triangle that I wrapped, flip it, and squash. And then I actually have something that I noticed in the tiling that I want to share, which is that when we're looking at that next portion of twists, so we just did everything inside this inner hexagon and double depth, mixed depth, and closed triangle. What I'm noticing is that I would rather continue folding around from the closed or from the small triangle side, not the big triangle side. Just the way the layers in the paper are lining up, I would rather go around the other way. And so in order to make that happen, I'm going to start with this trapezoid on the other side of the mixed depth twist that I put in, and then I'm going to add the triangle, and then I'm going to add the double depth triangle, mixed depth hexagon, and trapezoid. I'm going to work my way down, adding on these slices with this expectation that I'm going to have a lot of overlaps going on every time I stop. So first up is the trapezoid and this triangle. I could wait to fold the triangle until a little later. We'll see exactly how things shake out. But first, returning to the paper, this is the mixed depth hexagon that I just folded. I want to fold that trapezoid that's on the other side. And for the spacing, I can look at an equivalent copy of this mixed depth hexagon. Now, it might not look exactly equivalent at the moment, but it does have this triangle in exactly the same orientation. And then we're going to have the double depth plate heading this direction. And I'm going to look at that and say, hey, I see one space and then a valley goes this way. So I'm going to have one space and then a valley goes that way. And my next twist off of the overlap from these two pleats, so from the triangle and the valley I just drew from the trapezoid, is going to be on the other side of the paper. So at that intersection, I'm going to make a wrap. These pleats are intersecting at a 60-degree angle. So between this mountain and that valley, there's 60 degrees, one grid triangle. And so this is going to need to be a compound wrap. And then the mountain fold of the middle single depth plate is on the same grid line as the mountain fold of the double depth plate. So I've got my compound wrap, got the mountain, my middle single depth plate. Then if I want this to be a open trapezoid twist instead of closed, I'm going to have this third single depth mountain hit one space out from the intersection of the original two single depth plate mountains of single depth plates. I can also see that this gives me the tube pleat spacing that I see elsewhere in the pattern. And press to squash. Okay, so I'm heading in this direction, and I'm going to need a mixed depth hexagon at that overlap. I'm going to need a double depth triangle down below. Let's see if I can set up that double depth triangle, which we've seen has a tube pleat off that side. Let's see if I can set that up. And here I'm not going to do the compound wrap right now because I'm setting this up as a three-way intersection. So that really opened up my space. And now I can flip over and have space to put in this next mixed depth hexagon. So I've got my double depth pleat in here, single depth, single depth. The next one will also be double depth. And I have the space to just cause a pleat overlap with that. And then single depth here, and I'm adding an additional, on screen, I'm adding an additional single depth pleat to this existing double depth pleat. The valley would come right from that corner. So it's going to cancel out the mountain that was there and put a new mountain one space further away. And by the way, I've never folded this pattern before, so there may be surprises along the way. But I have practiced a lot of ways of resolving these kinds of things, so it might look like I've already done it. And then flipping over, I know, because I looked at the tiling, that if I have another trapezoid and a triangle, I can resolve this overlap. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. I know from right here that I'm going to have tube pleat spacing. So tube pleat spacing, and that I'm going to wrap for the triangle. This is my mountain of the of the double depth pleat. So that's going to continue and become a mountain of a single depth pleat. And then my third single depth pleat hits one space away. Basically, I'm looking more for making this half of a puffy hexagon, like half of an open hexagon twist. And I don't care so much about specifically counting the spaces for the intersections of the mountain folds. Okay. So from here, I have this triangle wrap on the back, and I have this double depth triangle waiting to be folded on the front. If I just went ahead and folded it, I would be incorporating all kinds of extra folds that I do not need. So I'm going to do like I did for the first one, open it up and do a compound wrap. You'll notice that I did not bother opening it up back here because I don't need to do this maneuver. I can do a compound wrap whenever I want, no matter what other pleats are around, assuming I have the right angle for it, which is that 60 degrees. And then flipping over, I'm going to open up that compound wrap. And that's my double depth pleat. So 2 in, 2 out. I've got that tube pleat spacing running up under the existing twist, and I'm making a triangle wrap. And over here, I also want to get, on screen, I also want to get rid of this pleat that's passing through. And I'm going to do that with a triangle wrap. with the same spacing that we saw on our initial hexagon of this ring around the center. So what I was looking for is this single depth pleat, the one in, one out, and then the valley starting from that corner. And now I have my next hexagon, 2 triangles wrapped around it, and this other triangle that I'd left wrapped that I can now squash. And now I can flip over and squash these 2 triangles. And I'm in a state with no pleat overlaps. So that's what I had showed on the tiling, which is that once I had this double depth triangle, mixed depth hexagon, and closed triangle, single depth triangle is what the tiling shows, but it's closed in this pattern. Then once I add a trapezoid, mixed depth hexagon, and double depth triangle, another trapezoid and triangle, and then another mixed depth hexagon with 2 triangles on either side, I'm at a smooth boundary condition again. So now I'm going to repeat that for that next edge and go a little bit faster because we're going to be working all the way around. And I'm going to start with that one space along the visible mountain fold until we get the valley for the new trapezoid, which I will use to make a compound wrap on the pleat from the triangle. Set up that trapezoid twist. Notice the tube pleat spacing down here. And squash. And then I'm going to get rid of a lot of the bulk in here by setting up my double depth triangle as a 3-way intersection. Basically, I could flip over and do it as a wrap from this side. So it's exactly equivalent to a double depth triangle wrap in here, but it's a bit easier to spot from that other side. And then I've got my 1 in, 1 out, 1 in, 1 out. I've got my 2 in, 2 out. I need that double depth pleat going up through here, and I'm going to fold that as an overlap for right now. And then this area is going to be dense. Again, I'm adding a 3rd pleat depth to my triangle wrap. And then I'll flip over and resolve this overlap with a trapezoid and a triangle wrap. And this double depth triangle will need a compound wrap to untangle the layers. And the important thing to remember with the compound wrap is that this is a double depth pleat for the triangle, passing over a single depth pleat for the other triangle. And squash. And then flipping over, I can go ahead and squash the little triangle that I had wrapped and opening up the compound wrap. I will need a triangle wrap on both sides of this mixed depth hexagon to let everything even out. And squash. And flip and triangles. Rinse and repeat. So finding these locations in the tiling that have the good stopping points for the pattern is really critical for being able to fold predictably and smoothly and with a repeating sequence of steps. Because if I didn't know where to stop, I would have all kinds of trouble, and I would basically be folding until I ran out of grid. One of the convenient things about this particular pattern is that the tiling breaks seem to be aligned with the edge, which is very nice. So this time around, I'm going to demonstrate how I would do it if I just flipped over to fold the next hexagon. I would be looking for, okay, there's my double depth pleat passing through here. Okay, that's not so bad to wrap there. But it is still a little easier to locate from the other side. And then trapezoid and triangle wrap, resolve that corner. And to squash that triangle, I need a compound wrap. And one thing I don't think I've mentioned is that this single depth pleat can tuck inside the double depth pleat on the back. So that makes the layers a bit happier. And then flipping over, can open up the next mixed depth hexagon and triangles on both sides. For a pattern with this many flagstone motifs, it is kind of shocking how many tube pleats there are. It's a really nice one to fold for the visual appeal that you get out. repeat. Adding in the new trapezoid. Notice I'm really focusing on that compound wrap first. Because that's what's passing through the crunchy thick layers. The other pleats are going straight to the edge. And then mixed up hexagon with double depth triangle wrap. That is going to have another pleat depth added onto it. Yeah. And flip and triangle time, or sorry, well, also triangle, but trapezoid, causing a triangle. And I forgot to squash the wrap from earlier. I have to remember that this time. It's easy to forget them. If that move just looked like sorcery, it looked like that to me too. So here's the triangle I forgot last time. And at this point, I've pretty much got the spacing memorized for all the wraps. So conveniently, it's a tube pleat of mountain folds up here. So 2 spaces between these mountains. And it's a tube pleat of valley folds down here. So 2 spaces between parallel valleys. So everything is tube pleat spacing, and it's making flagstone motifs of these mixed up hexagons. And squash the triangles. And now we're heading into our last set of parallel pleats. We're going to see a little bit more going on at the corner. Basically, let me switch back to the tiling. When we work our way all the way around, and I like to think of it as kind of this area, we're working our way around this way, and we've made our way around. We get to this part where we would usually stop, but the previous part didn't start until over here. So we're going to have this bit still to do on top of pleats coming out this way. So that'll be interesting, but we'll deal with it when it comes up. And getting that compound wrap first. and the mixed depth hexagon with the double depth triangle wrap. And the extra pleat added onto the wrap. And we can resolve the stuff up here, the trapezoid and the triangle. And actually, speaking to what we were talking about before with the layers and the grid lines, you can see there that there's a new valley fold that was slightly off grid. And my advice there would be to not run your bone folder too much over areas with a lot of layers. And then I can smooth it out with my bone folder after, somewhat. And here with my double depth triangle that I'm opening up. Okay. So remember, I'm opening 2 spaces down, 1 space over. These guys can tuck up and inside the double depth. It's still really thick, but I'm just squashing the triangle. And so when I use my bone folder, I can press just on the triangle and not all up in there. And then, okay, here's where layering is going to matter. I'm going to take this pleat from the triangle down here. Or is that from a trapezoid? No, it's from the double depth triangle. And I'm going to tuck it under the single depth pleat here, because this new mixed depth hexagon needs to make a triangle wrap. So that was triangle wrap number 1. This needs to make a triangle wrap with the single depth pleat. And if the double depth pleat was on top, it would be in the way. And like I mentioned before, we're going to have 2 pleat spacing, so that valley is 2 spaces away from the valley underneath, under here. And we're going to let that run on through. And that double depth pleat is just hanging out there. Acting like it's going to cause a bunch of problems, but it doesn't have to. And I can remember to squash that triangle. And flip over. This triangle is free to squash. This one needs a compound wrap. And this is a single depth pleat doing a compound wrap over a double depth pleat. So it's popping 1 down, 2 over. And that lays flat again. Very convenient. So now there's a choice about how I continue. And that choice is, do I try and fit in this trapezoid right now, or do I go for the mixed depth hexagon? Because usually I would be starting the next trapezoid with the pleat up through here, which I'm experimenting right now. Oh, okay. Yep. That works. A very Mira organization. We're basically going to have all these pleats wrapping. So let me take that out. Let's see. I think, well, that was the most recent thing, so it would have been this and that. Yeah. Okay. So from here, what we can do to get through this, because I don't really want to do the mixed depth hexagon and then try to wrap the trapezoid, because that often turns into a messy situation. I'm going to have my valley from the trapezoid. It's coming up, and this time, notice it's hitting this mountain fold at 120 degrees. So that's going to be a triangle wrap, not a compound wrap. So that valley is going to continue straight. It's going to continue straight on the same grid line until it hits this other valley, and then it's going to bounce. And the mountain is going to follow one grid spacing away. So that's one pleat. And then the mountain that is coming out of my, so the through line of the trapezoid, the mountain of the double depth pleat is going to come out, and instead of continuing out the same grid line, it is going to do a triangle wrap also immediately. Well, functionally it's doing a compound wrap, but the top of the compound wrap is right at that point. So it's going to do its own zigzag. And then we're going to have a valley down in here that is 2 spaces away from the valley up above, which can all then fold down flat. It's going to look weird because it's pulling up and in, but it still squashes the same. And now, when I go and flip over, I need to open all of that funny business and restore the pleat of my trapezoid how it was. Now I have a double depth pleat and 2 single depth pleats already going into my mixed depth hexagon. And then I'm going to do this triangle wrap down here first over the single depth pleat, which lets me open up all of this. Then I have another single depth pleat through there. I can fully fold that pleat from the trapezoid, and then the double depth pleat of my new mixed depth hexagon can pass through as an overlap, pretty much like we're used to seeing it. And then I can flip over. This triangle I can squash right away. And then I can open this up and it's my normal trapezoid with a triangle wrap. And flip and squash. And that is how you fold this pattern. So I'm going to zoom out a bit so we can see the whole thing. I've got these chunks of flagstone mixed up hexagon twists. The pattern is named Helicopter Hangar because these helicopter shapes are going to repeat further out. And I want to return to the tiling real quick because so while you can't see it directly on this amount of the tiling, that actually was the last true tiling break that this pattern has. So moving beyond that in this pattern requires maybe going through and saying, hey, let's look without the boundaries. You can say, hey, this line that I had is equivalent to this one. So what's the next layer out that I could possibly do? And 2 spaces, it doesn't get through these twists. You might be able to find a way to have them stay 3D. But what I'd actually recommend is accepting some overlaps, where you do 2 spaces to get you through the copy of the center, and then you do 3 spaces to complete these twists, and just accept that you're going to have an overlap of this pleat with however many pleats you have through this area. And then you round the corner and you complete the next hexagon, and then you have an overlap and you do more. So that is what I would recommend for the folding process if you were using, I don't know, 80 grid divisions or something to get those next repeats in. But you're not going to have a nice pleated border again in this pattern. And I can say that very definitively because we can actually look back at the tiling and say, hey, there are these lines that start at a particular location and they go for some distance and then they stop. And there are lines that start at other locations, they go some distance and then they stop. That is the structure of this pattern. The lines go straight for a while, but then they stop. So there are no lines that continue straight all the way through. And therefore, there are no arbitrarily large stopping points with no overlaps. So that is how we fold Helicopter Hangar. And I want to take a quick look back at the chat, see what's going on. And yeah, like I earlier said, this is the kind of pattern that requires a massive grid to have repeats. And there's a lot of hidden complexity with the pattern where we're looking at all of these different options for, where we're looking at all of these different twist positions, all of this complexity of arrangement and seeing, okay, what can fit in a bound, what cannot. And this is exactly the view that I teach in Tessellation Academy also Tessellations by Tiles, but mostly Tessellation Academy is the one that's getting into things that are this complicated. So that, if you don't know, is my monthly membership, where I make 2 tutorial videos, one for the first week, one for the second week. One's easier, the next one's harder. And then the third week of the month, we have a live on Zoom theory and design session where I talk through, okay, here's the tilings that we're focused on this month. Here's the symmetry properties. Here's the properties for folding, the boundaries, basically those stopping points. And then we go and design a new pattern together, where I say, okay, like we did for designing this pattern back in November, if I'm going to have a hexagon, is it going to be closed or open? If I'm going to have a triangle next to it, is that going to be closed or open on the same or opposite side as the hexagon? This trapezoid, is it going to be closed or open? Is it going to be on the hexagon side or not? And is it going to connect this way or that way? And then what mixed depth twist do we want to put in there? Is it going to be the 2-fold hexagon, 3-fold hexagon, 2-fold rhombus? Do we want to have that in a position of symmetry? Is it going to be on the front or the back of the paper? Often the previous choices will dictate whether it's going to be on the front or the back. And then going into broader and broader and seeing, okay, do we want to have this triangle as a position of symmetry, or do we want to throw in another triangle and have that be a position of symmetry? These are the ways that we build up the patterns, and then I immediately sit down and teach the pattern. So you can see the theory applied immediately in these workshops, which is one of the most fun parts about all of this. Oh, and Zach, thanks for mentioning your package. Zach ordered some paper. You can see behind me lots of stacks of paper that I just got in from the manufacturer last week. And now I actually have all 4 colors that are available from the manufacturer, which are blue, like this one. Actually, let me grab the right sheets. There's a natural, let's see. There's a natural and a natural cream and a white. Yeah. So these are the 4 colors that you can get this paper in. Pretty sure I have a link in the description that takes you to the paper packs available on my website. So there's all kinds of things that you can do with origami tessellations, and if you want to get the paper that I use, you can do that too. So happy folding, everyone. Glad you could join me. And welcome to everyone on the replay as well. And I hope you try and fold this for yourself and use these ideas to fold more patterns. And in particular, there's not just one pattern that uses these trapezoid twists around a hexagon in Advent of Tess this past year. There are several, and you can use these techniques excuse me, and draw out the tilings and see what fits where. So the rest of these use mixed depth rhombi, which is something that I have taught in Tessellation Academy. And by the way, you can sign up for Tessellation Academy at any point in time at training.gatheringfolds.com/academy. And you can see all of these different ways of folding patterns in there. So yes, I encourage you to fold more origami tessellations. that is what I want to leave you with. Happy folding, everyone, and see you in the next video.